Sign the papers, Zara. Daniel, you've always told me to trust you. So look me in the eyes and tell me none of this is true. The company is completing the largest merger in its history. This conversation is over. I'm pregnant. Then you'd better sign before it becomes complicated. Say something.
I never wanted things to happen this way, but maybe this is what's best.
I hope one day you meet a woman you're proud to stand beside.
The night Zara Mensah walked out of the Yoon estate, she had $43 in her purse, one suitcase, and a child whose future had suddenly become hers alone to protect. She did not cry walking down that road in the rain. She had spent 3 years learning to cry quietly behind closed doors in rooms where nobody could use it against her. She was done with that particular skill now. She pressed one hand against her stomach and kept walking. Daniel had made his choice. His mother had made it easier for him. Zara had made hers. She had met Daniel Yoon 3 years earlier at a charity function she attended, representing a wellness brand. He had found her in the corner, arguing politely but firmly with a photographer who kept telling her to stand differently. "You're fine exactly where you are," he had said, appearing beside her with 2 drinks. She had looked at him with the specific suspicion of a woman who has been complimented by powerful men before and knows what usually comes next. He had not followed with anything except a question about her work. By the end of the evening, she had forgotten to be suspicious. A year later, they were married. Zara never pretended the marriage was simple. Daniel's world was built on appearances, and she was a woman who had spent her career challenging what appearances were supposed to mean. The tension was always there. She had believed love was enough to navigate it. She had been wrong about that. Not about the love. About whether love was sufficient when the people around a man applied enough pressure in the right places. Margaret Yoon had applied that pressure with the patience of someone who understood that direct attacks leave evidence and quiet erosion leaves none. She never screamed at Zara. She simply ensured that every room, every dinner, every family gathering communicated the same message: you are temporary here. Daniel had watched. He had sometimes squeezed Zara's hand under the table. He had never once said anything out loud. The night Zara discovered she was pregnant, she had planned everything carefully. Dinner, a small white box, 2 tiny baby shoes inside. She had rehearsed what she would say and how she would say it, and imagined his face when he understood what it meant. Then Margaret had appeared, and Daniel had stood in their own home and said, maybe this is what is best. Zara had looked at him for 3 seconds. Then she picked up her coat, left the white box on the table, and walked out. The road outside the estate was dark, and the rain showed no mercy. A car sped past without slowing and soaked the hem of her dress. She barely registered it. She was thinking about the baby, about what she owed this person who had no say in any of what was happening around them. She owed them a mother who did not fall apart. She straightened her shoulders and kept walking. She almost missed the sound of the crash. It came from around the bend ahead, a screech of tires, a grinding impact, and then a silence so complete it felt wrong. Then the low crackle of something beginning to burn. Zara moved toward it without deciding to. When she came around the bend, she saw a black SUV on its side against a steel barrier, smoke pouring from the engine, and a cluster of bystanders standing at a careful distance. Every single one of them had a phone raised. Nobody was moving toward the car. A voice came from inside the wreckage. Weak. Barely there. "Help." Zara looked at the bystanders. "Why isn't anyone—" "It could explode," a man said without lowering his phone. Zara dropped her suitcase and ran toward the wreckage. Someone shouted after her. She did not slow down. She reached the passenger side and looked through the shattered window. An elderly woman was trapped inside, silver-haired, blood tracking down the side of her face, eyes open and looking directly at Zara, with the expression of someone who has accepted that they are going to die and is surprised to find someone looking back at them. "I've got you," Zara said. She braced both hands against the twisted doorframe and pushed. The metal shifted just enough. Zara felt it give beneath her hands, not much, just a fraction, but enough to change the angle of the doorframe pressing against the woman's leg. She braced again and pushed harder, and this time the gap widened. "Can you move?" she asked. "I think so." The woman's voice was steadier than her situation had any right to produce. I'm going to pull you toward me. Tell me if it hurts too much to continue. Just get me out. Zara reached through the window, got both arms around the woman's shoulders, and pulled slowly and steadily the way you pull something fragile with patience rather than force. The woman came free. Zara walked them both backward, 3 steps, 4, 5, until they were clear of the vehicle. Then the SUV erupted. The heat wave hit them from behind. People screamed. Someone dropped their phone. The bystanders who had been recording scattered backward. Zara lowered the woman carefully to the ground and checked her face, her breathing, the leg that had been trapped. "Ambulance is coming," someone called from the crowd. 3 minutes too late to be useful, Zara thought, but she said nothing. The woman looked up at her. "You ran toward it," she said. "Everyone else ran away. I heard you call for help." So did they. Zara had no answer for that. She took off her coat and folded it under the woman's head. The rain had softened to a drizzle. Somewhere behind them, the SUV burned. "What's your name?" the woman asked. "Zara, Eleanor Ashford." The woman said it the way people say their name when they are accustomed to it meaning something to whoever hears it. Then she watched Zara's face and seemed to register that it meant nothing. Something in her expression shifted. "You genuinely don't know who I am." "Should I?" Eleanor almost smiled. "Most people in this city would." The ambulance arrived. The paramedics took over and Zara stepped back. She retrieved her suitcase from the road and stood watching while they stabilized Eleanor and prepared to move her. One of Eleanor's security team, who had arrived in a second vehicle and looked deeply shaken by what they had failed to prevent, approached Zara. "She's asking for you to come to the hospital." Zara looked at the suitcase in her hand. At the road stretching ahead with no particular destination at the end of it, though she knew she had a cheap motel 30 blocks away paid for by the last of her cash, leaving her with nowhere permanent to sleep by tomorrow. "All right," she said. She sat in the waiting room for 2 hours while Eleanor was examined. A nurse eventually found her and said the older woman was asking for her. Zara followed her through a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and fluorescent lighting and found Eleanor sitting upright in a hospital bed, looking considerably more composed than anyone who had just been pulled from a burning vehicle had. Any right to look. "You're still here," Eleanor said. "You asked me to come. I expected you to leave anyway. Most people make promises in a crisis they don't keep once the crisis is over." Zara sat in the chair beside the bed. "How's the leg?" "Bruised, not broken. The head wound looks worse than it is." Eleanor studied her with the focused attention of someone who had spent decades reading people across negotiating tables. "You have 1 suitcase." "Yes. And nowhere particular to go tonight." It wasn't a question. Zara didn't treat it as one. "I'll manage. You saved my life an hour ago, and you're still being careful not to ask me for anything. I didn't help you, so you would owe me something." "I know." Eleanor leaned back against the pillow. "That's why I'm going to offer you something anyway." Zara waited. "I run Ashford International," Eleanor said, her tone shifting from casual observation to something sharp and deliberate. "Finance, property, hospitality. I've spent 8 months looking for a head of client relations. Every candidate my team has pushed across my desk has been polished, credentialed, and completely hollow. You made a decision tonight that most people talk themselves out of in the time it took you to draw a breath. That isn't a resume line. That's instinct. I've worked in wellness consulting, Eleanor. I don't know corporate balance sheets. I'm not offering you the position tonight," Eleanor said, her eyes glinting with a sudden calculating challenge. "I'm offering you an interview." Zara frowned, caught off guard. "Why? If I'm not qualified, why waste your time?" "Because tomorrow morning I have a meeting with a board member who believes character can be measured entirely on a resume and clean spreadsheets," Eleanor said softly. "I would like to prove him wrong by bringing in someone who actually knows how humans behave when the floor caves in." Zara looked at the woman in the hospital bed who had been a stranger 2 hours ago. "Why are you really doing this? People like you don't pluck strangers off wet asphalt just to win an internal corporate argument. People like me spend millions trying to buy loyalty and failing," Eleanor said dryly. "And because I was trapped in a burning car tonight, and you were the only person on that road who didn't calculate the risk before you moved." Zara felt something loosen in her chest. Not hope, exactly. Something older and more fragile, the first sign that a door existed somewhere ahead of her. She looked down at her lap, her fingers tracing the seam of her jeans. If she was going to step into this world, she wasn't going to do it under false pretenses. I'm pregnant. Eleanor didn't blink. I noticed. Zara looked up, surprised. And that doesn't change your mind? Should it? Most employers look at a pregnant woman with one suitcase and see a liability. Eleanor let out a short, dry sound that might have been a laugh. Most employers lack imagination. The baby's father, is he in the picture? He made his choice tonight, Zara said quietly. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, studying the younger woman with a gaze that missed nothing. Then you'll need stable income, premier medical coverage, and an employer who treats your life as an asset rather than an inconvenience. If you pass my interview tomorrow, I can offer you all three. Zara looked at the woman she had met in the rain beside a burning vehicle and understood something she had not yet put into words. The night Daniel had handed her divorce papers, she had believed her life was collapsing. She was beginning to understand it had simply been redirected. I'll need time to prove myself, Zara said. Eleanor smiled, leaning back against the pillows. I'm counting on it. 7 years passed faster than anyone in the Unistate had ever cared to calculate. The night Zara Mensah walked away into the storm, she had carried $43, one suitcase, and a future she had to build from ash. She refused to let that night define her, but she never forgot it either. Under Eleanor Ashford's mentorship, Zara didn't just learn business, she devoured it. She spent her days studying corporate acquisitions and her nights reading financial reports until the numbers became second nature. When she launched her first luxury bakery, it wasn't just a shop, it was a statement. Within 3 years, it had expanded into a premier chain across the city, pairing uncompromising quality with a brand ethos that celebrated real women. She never pretended to be someone she wasn't. She remained proudly plus-size, facing magazine interviewers head-on whenever they tried to steer the conversation toward body standards. My body never stopped me from succeeding, she told a national broadsheet. Other people's opinions almost did. Beside her, Noah grew into a bright, fiercely observant 7-year-old. He loved baking cookies with his mother on Sunday afternoons and adored Eleanor, whom he proudly called Grandma Ellie. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Eleanor stood in her high-floor executive office, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. Samuel Rhodes, now silver-haired but as sharp as ever, entered quietly. The final signatures are in, Samuel said. Eleanor turned away from the glass with a satisfied smile. So it's official. Blackwood Holdings belongs to Ashford International. Eleanor shifted her gaze to Zara, who was reviewing a portfolio at her desk. It's time. Across town, panic had descended upon the Blackwood Holdings tower like a sudden squall. Employees whispered in the carpeted corridors. Board members hurried between glass-walled conference rooms, sweating through their tailored suits. No one had been given a reason for the emergency acquisition meeting called at dawn, but the rumors were terrifying. Ashford International, a corporate titan that swallowed empires whole, was executing a hostile takeover. Inside the boardroom, Adrian Blackwood adjusted his tie with trembling fingers. His company had been bleeding capital for 18 months. Bad investments, slipping investor confidence, and a string of failed property deals had brought the firm to its knees. Vivian Yoon, looking older and harder-edged, sat rigidly beside him. They're just sending a restructuring team, Adrian. Hold your ground. As long as they don't replace management, Adrian muttered, staring blankly at the polished mahogany table. The heavy double doors at the end of the room swung open. Every conversation died instantly. High heels clicked against the polished floor, steady, measured, rhythmic. Then she stepped into the light. Zara. She wore a sharply tailored navy blue suit that commanded the room before she even opened her mouth. She hadn't shrunk to fit their expectations. She had expanded into her power. Her posture was absolute, her expression serene. Vivian's face drained of color. Her breath caught in her throat. No, it can't be. Adrian froze. The air left his lungs. He stared at her face, searching the features he had once dismissed, looking for the frightened wife he had handed divorce papers to 7 years ago. There was nothing frightened left in her. Zara walked to the head of the table, the exact seat that had once belonged to Adrian's father and later to Adrian himself. She seated herself without a single rush, resting her hands calmly on a sleek leather folder. She looked around the room, acknowledging the stunned board members with a polite, professional nod. Good morning. Her voice was cool, clear, and utterly dominant. My name is Zara Mensah. She paused, letting a faint, knowing smile touch her lips. chairwoman and CEO of Ashford International. Silence choked the room. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Adrian stood up slowly, his legs shaking beneath him. I don't understand. You will, Zara said. She pressed a remote control in her hand. The massive projection screen behind her illuminated, flashing a cascade of financial data, asset valuations, and audit results. For the past 3 years, Zara began, her tone analytical and unyielding, Blackwood Holdings has systematically gutted its own liquidity. Poor acquisitions, inflated executive compensation, and an outright refusal to adapt to modern market realities have left this company insolvent in all but name. For 20 minutes, she didn't raise her voice once. She didn't insult anyone. She simply dismantled their entire corporate legacy using hard, unarguable facts. Every chart pointed to a single, inescapable conclusion. Blackwood Holdings was dead. Ashford International was simply signing the death certificate. When she finished, she closed her folder with a quiet thud. As majority shareholder, Zara said, looking directly into Adrian's hollow eyes, I have approved a complete restructuring of this board. The board members, realizing resistance was suicide, nodded one by one. The vote was unanimous. Zara stood up, looking across the table at the man who had traded his family for a press release. Effective immediately, Zara said softly, you are relieved of your duties as chief executive officer. Adrian gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. He looked at her not with anger, but with a crushing, bottomless disbelief. I built this company, and now, Zara answered calmly, someone else has to save it. Just then, the boardroom door clicked open. A cheerful, high-pitched voice bounced off the glass walls. Mom! A 7-year-old boy with bright eyes and a familiar dimple on his left cheek sprinted into the room, heading straight for Zara. Zara's corporate armor instantly melted into warmth. She knelt, catching Noah in her arms as he threw his small arms around her neck. Hey, sweetheart, she whispered into his hair, kissing his cheek. What are you doing here? I finished my tutoring early, and Grandma Ellie brought me up, Noah beamed, before pulling back and looking around the massive, silent room. Are you done saving the company yet? Zara chuckled softly. Right on time, bug. Adrian's eyes tracked every movement of the boy. The way he smiled, the shape of his nose, the unmistakable dimple. His entire world narrowed down to a point so sharp it felt like a physical blow. He staggered half a step backward, grabbing the back of his chair. How old is he? Adrian's voice cracked. Zara stood up, keeping one protective hand resting on Noah's shoulder. 7, she said evenly. Adrian's knees buckled slightly. 7. The math slammed into him with the force of a freight train. The night she walked out into the rain, the pregnancy test left unspoken, his eyes filled with hot, unbidden tears. His voice dropped to a ragged whisper. He's mine, isn't he? Zara didn't offer a dramatic speech. She didn't scream or gloat. She simply looked at him with quiet, pitying finality. Yes. Vivian slumped back into her chair, her hands shaking so violently she had to press them into her lap. My grandson, the old woman thought, a cold wave of horror washing over her. Oh God, I did this. Noah looked up at his mother innocently, tugging at her sleeve. Mom, who are these people? Zara smiled softly down at him. It's all right, sweetie. Just some people leaving work. She looked past her son one last time at Adrian, who stood paralyzed beneath the weight of his own choices. You gave up the chance to know him the night you chose silence. Without another word, Zara took Noah's small hand in hers and turned her back on the wreckage of the Blackwood Empire, walking out of the boardroom into a future she had carved entirely with her own 2 hands. A week after the board meeting, the heavy oak door of Zara's executive office clicked shut. Vivian Yoon stood just inside the threshold. The immaculate designer suits, the heavy gold jewelry, and the towering arrogance that had defined her existence inside the Yoon estate were gone. She wore a simple charcoal coat, her silver hair unstyled, looking smaller and older than her 70 years. She didn't sit down until Zara motioned to the chair opposite her desk. I didn't come to ask for my shares back, Vivian said, her voice dry and stripped of its old authority. And I didn't come to ask you to spare Adrian. He broke the company because he never learned how to look past his own reflection. That's on him. Zara remained silent, her hands resting quietly over her portfolio. She waited, I spent 40 years believing that pedigree was a shield against reality, Vivian continued, her gaze dropping to her trembling hands. I taught my son that status was the only currency that mattered. My pride cost him his family, and it cost me 7 years with my grandson. A single tear broke free, tracking down a weathered cheek. I was wrong. About everything. Zara looked at the woman who had once pushed divorce papers across a mahogany table like a death sentence. There was no triumph in watching her crumble, only the quiet weight of time settling its accounts. I waited a long time to hear those words, Vivian, Zara said softly. Not because I wanted an apology, because I wanted you to understand that human worth isn't something you can measure on a balance sheet. Vivian nodded slowly, standing up with a heavy sigh. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply accepted the distance she had manufactured. I know. 3 days later, Adrian asked Zara to meet him at the edge of the city park, where the autumn leaves drifted across the concrete pathways. He stood near the playground swings with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking exhausted. When Zara arrived with Noah, the boy ran off toward the slides, giving them a brief perimeter of privacy. Adrian stepped forward, his throat tight. I've rehearsed what I wanted to say 1,000 times. And? Zara asked, her arms loosely crossed. I was ashamed, he admitted, his voice cracking. Not because of you, because I cared more about what strangers said than the woman who stood beside me. I convinced myself I was protecting the business, but the truth is, I was protecting my own ego. Zara watched him steadily. When you handed me those papers, you made your priorities clear. When you left, I should have followed you into the storm, Adrian whispered, a tear spilling over his lash. When you told me about our baby, I should have stood up to my mother. I failed you, and I failed our son. You didn't lose me because I didn't fit your mother's mold, Zara said, taking one measured step closer. You lost me because every single time you had to choose between integrity and public opinion, you chose the applause of people who didn't even care about you. Adrian bowed his head. I know. He looked toward the swings where Noah was laughing, tossing wood chips with a carefree grin. Do you think, is there any way I could ever earn the chance to be his father? Zara tracked her son for a long moment, weighing the jagged edges of the past against the future her child deserved. Being his biological father was settled 7 years ago, Zara said evenly. Becoming his dad starts today. But understand this, Adrian, if you disappear from his life when it becomes inconvenient, you won't just lose me, you'll lose him entirely. Adrian nodded immediately, a desperate flicker of hope touching his eyes. I won't. I swear it. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of the National Business Excellence Awards was packed to capacity. When the presenter's voice boomed across the sound system, announcing the recipient of the Entrepreneur of the Year award, the crowd rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation. Zara walked up the steps to the stage, wearing a stunning emerald gown that commanded the room. She held the heavy crystal trophy, her smile radiant and completely unforced. Out in the audience, sitting quietly near the back row, was Adrian. Not as a titan of industry or a master of the universe, but as an ordinary guest. He wasn't hiding her, and he wasn't pretending she didn't exist. He was simply applauding the extraordinary woman he should have been proud of from the very beginning. Zara looked past the blinding lights of the stage, finding Noah in the front rows next to Eleanor, who beamed with maternal pride. As she lifted the award, Zara knew the victory wasn't about the empire she had conquered or the titles she had earned. It was about the simple, hard-won truth that she had refused to let someone else's shame become her own.